Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very, very special guest. It is a real honor to have Dr. Art Laffer, and I'll just say a few words about him. Dr. Laffer is a renowned economist, best known for the Laffer Curve, an influential theory that explores the relationship between the rates, tax rates, and tax revenues, and we'll get into that. He was also one of the people who influenced me in my understanding about economics throughout the years. He was a big part of the Reagan administration and the way I think in America we'll ask him about that specifically, but the way I think the America in general changed its thought about the economy and the way the conservative movement spoke about the economy. So, Dr. Laffer, it's a great honor and privilege to speak with you.
Thank you very, very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Ariel.
So I want to, first of all, I'm talking from Israel, you're in the United States. So I just want to maybe before we talk about economics, just say you were very close to a lot of Republican administrations. How would you for the first question, talk about how you feel about what's happening in Israel vis-a-vis the Biden administration and Trump coming in, maybe, hopefully, like we say. How do you feel about all that's going on right now?
Let me correct you a little bit. Yes, I've been associated with a number of Republican administrations, but also a number of Democratic administrations as well. I did Jerry Brown's flat tax when he ran for president in the Democratic primary in 1992. I was Gary Hart's economist in 1988. There and that. So I'm a Kennedy Democrat, I'm a Reagan Republican, I'm a Clinton Democrat, and I'm a Trump Republican. So I like tax cuts, I like economic growth, I like Benjamin Netanyahu a lot. In fact, he has said in a number of occasions, I have on my wall on the other side here a Laffer Curve that he's holding up that he sent to me.
Yeah?
In fact, in his book, he said I was his favorite economist. But then he added, but Arthur Laffer is not Jewish. Well, I'm not Jewish, that's true. He said, in spite of that, he's still a good economist. I find him very entertaining personally. I like him very much. I've been to Israel a number of times, and I just love the country. I think it's wonderful, and I love the strong relationship which we have had with Israel, and I admire the Israeli economists enormously. And, there was a time there during Reagan's first inauguration, that was in 1981, early 1981, when I was invited by Chaim Ben Shaka. I don't know if you know Chaim Ben Shaka, at Tel Aviv University to come over and give a series of lectures. I taught at the University of Chicago. I was a tenured professor there, and I came to do the lectures there in Israel, and I was met at the airport by 7 of my PhD students from Chicago. I'd returned home to a place I'd never been before. So I am a huge fan of Israel's in almost every aspect. And what can I say? I personally don't think this situation would have occurred in Israel if Trump had been president. I don't think the attempt would have been made. I don't think it would have happened. I think the Trump presidency would have stopped that from happening. I personally am 100%, if not more, with Israel on this. I find this just a tragedy beyond belief. It's so sad.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so it's just important to me to get your perspective. So now turning to economics, I wanted to ask you about we're coming up on an election, and you said you're a Trump Republican, and I listened to a few interviews that you did lately about the Trump economic platform and how the first term was and what you think the second term will bring. So I wanted to ask you just about the differences between President Biden, President Biden's years in the office and Donald Trump's years in the office, and maybe in the future more years in the office. What do you think are the main differences between, or maybe even the economic philosophies between today's Democrat Party under Joe Biden and today's Republican Party under Donald Trump?
Yeah, let me, if I can, make sure you understand that two things. Number one is I'm an economist, and that's all I am publicly. I mean, I like cereal and I enjoy walking in the woods, but that's not what I talk about. It's just economics. The second thing I want to make sure you understand is I don't speak in any way, shape, or form for President Trump at all. I don't. I see him, I talk with him and everything, but I never ask him what his views are for the very reasons I don't want to know, because I don't want to ever be put in a position where I'm asked, well, what does Trump think about this? Right. I can tell you what I say, but just make sure you understand that this is not what he's told me to say to you. It's not. Of course. Okay. So please, on all those counts. And the way I look at the economy, and I'm going to be sort of Don Patinkin-ish, if I can. Don Patinkin, the professor at Israel, their economist, just terrific. Yeah. I look at it in terms of a macroeconomics textbook. The 5 major sections in this textbook are: number 1, taxation; number 2, government spending; number 3, monetary policy, inflation; number 4, regulations; and number 5, trade. That's the way I break my world of economics out, okay, and look at it. Now, in some countries, you have some other ones like privatization and other stuff, but in the worlds we're looking at in the U.S., this is pretty much the whole of macroeconomics. You with me on that? Yeah. And what I like to do on each of these kingdoms, as I call them, the macroeconomic 5 kingdoms of macroeconomics, I like to look at the North Star. What is the single optimal, theoretically optimal policy? And then ask myself the question: is here we are here, here's the North Star here, are we moving towards it or away from it? That's the way I look at all these. Now, when you look at taxes, and again, I'm going to be superficial here, but sufficiently precise to be clear. The ideal tax system, the North Star, is the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. So you provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. And number 2, so you have the broadest tax base, so you have the least number of places where you can put your income to avoid paying taxes. All right, that's what you need to do. That's the North Star. Now, when I look at this administration, Biden, I look at him moving away from it. He wants to let the taxes lapse. He's raised taxes already. The inflation has caused under depreciation of capital equipment, raised corporate taxes. It's raised rates. I mean, I could go through a lot. He's not done any massive ones. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of President Trump is still in place, and it's inuring very much to Biden's benefit. It's doing very well. But Biden is moving away from that. And my view of Trump and what Trump did in his first term was Trump moved us towards the North Star. So Trump was very plus on the tax policies, and Biden's the big minus. Yeah. You with me on the first kingdom? The second kingdom, government spending. Up until the pandemic, I think Trump, the best one, if we want spending restraint, government has a very important role to play in spending. We need judiciary, we need highways, we need defense, we need schools, all of these things, which are the appropriate role of government. Right. If the government doesn't spend enough, it will hurt the economy, but it will also hurt the economy if the government spends too much. There's just the right size of government. And what I see right now is this government and this administration has gone way beyond what they should be doing. My view of the world, we need spending restraint now. In the first 3 years of Trump in office, he was great on government spending. When the COVID hit, he had some of the spending I supported all the way. All the Operation Warp Speed I thought was terrific, but there was a lot of additional spending on welfare that I didn't think was necessary. But when I look at this administration, the North Star is spending restraint. I think there's no spending restraint on the part of this administration. And I think with regard to Trump, before COVID-19, I think he showed some spending restraint. And therefore, again, I think Trump was in the right direction, Biden on the wrong direction. Monetary policy. When I look at monetary policy, I think the Powell Fed and the members here have been way too lax on lowering interest rates and expanding the Fed balance sheet. The Fed balance sheet went from, let's say, in January of 2008 to today, went from about 800 billion to about 8 trillion, maybe 7.5 trillion. There was a period there we got up to 9 trillion. Very recently, I think the Fed has, the last 3-4 years, has just been terrible. And beforehand, I don't think the Fed was great either, but currently, I would say this administration, the ideal policy is sound money, sound money and stable prices.
Yeah.
I think the Biden administration has moved away from that ideal and has done a very poor job. I don't think there was much to say about the Trump administration, even though Trump did well on taxes, did well on spending up until the pandemic. I give it a C on money, but Biden, I give it a low grade on what he's done on money. I think Biden has done very poorly on taxes, very poorly on spending. I think he's done very poorly on price stability, sound money. I think he's done very poorly there. Regulations, I think Trump was spectacular.
Yes.
I mean, truly spectacular. Not only was Operation Warp Speed wonderful, breaking through all those regulations, all the restrictions to get the vaccine, but I think also, if you look at energy, his decontrol of energy and made us energy independent. I think that was spectacular. I think medical transparency that he did was spectacular. Again, lots of little regulations. I think Trump was probably the best single president I've seen and ever heard of in regulations. We all know now we need regulations. Now we all understand that, Ariel.
Mm-hmm.
You can't one day of the week drive on the left side of the road, the next day drive on the right. We need regulations. Right. But what you want to make sure is that these regulations don't go beyond the specific purposes at hand and create a lot of collateral damage. And that's the ideal. And Trump has been just magnificent on this. I think really good on this. And I think Biden has been terrible. I mean, just terrible. And lastly, free trade. And here's the one I think you're going to be surprised at my answer. And this maybe is because of my closeness and just my own feelings. But Biden has just announced huge tariff increases on China and sanctions on this, that, and the other. Free trade is not just 2 words. It's really serious, serious stuff. My colleague, Bob Mundell, in his Nobel laureate address, said that it was the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930 that led to the Great Depression, which led to World War II. There is nothing more horrible and more bad for the economy than tariffs, quotas, restrictions on trade, sanctions, all of this stuff. And when I look at trade, we produce some things better than foreigners, Ariel. And the foreigners produce some things better than we do. We and they would be foolish in the extreme if we didn't sell them those products we make better than they do. In exchange for those products they make better than we do. It's called a win-win. It's called the gains from trade. It's called comparative advantage. It's called David Ricardo. I don't care what you call it. But free trade is the sine qua non of prosperity of the world. And it's also the sine qua non of peace in the world. It really is. And so when I look at what's been going on, I think Biden has been terrible. I think the sanctions we put on countries are wrong, to be honest with you. No, I am not suggesting that we sell nuclear weapons to Kim Jong-un. I'm not suggesting that. But sanctions hurt us and foreigners. They also make for belligerents. We've had sanctions on Cuba now since 1959. What's that? That's 65 years. We've had sanctions on Cuba. You can see how well it's worked.
Yeah.
It has not worked at all. They hate us with a passion because of the sanction. We have free trade with Vietnam now. The relationships with Vietnam are much better. My view is that we should not put on sanctions on China. We should not put sanctions on Russia. We should not put sanctions on Iran. We should not put sanctions on North Korea. We should do trade so we can talk, we can work with them, we can get and collaborate. Free trade makes people sociable. I like making money. You like making money. When you do business with people, you like them, you socialize with them, and hopefully you convince them that what they're doing is bad and they should stop. And they may even convince you that what you're doing is bad and you should stop or to do more good things. But having economic intercourse is really important. for understanding the rest of the world and dealing with them and bringing on prosperity and peace.
And what about Trump in this issue? What about Trump on trade? Because he did he did at some point, I think, put on tariffs on steel or stuff like that from China. And he said it was a tactic for the negotiations for a free trade agreement with them, or to try to bring their tariffs down on them.
No, I really like Donald Trump. Now, it so happens I also like him personally. And I like Netanyahu personally very much. There's some people who don't. I love Donald Trump and his policies. I believe that Donald Trump is a negotiator. He understands negotiations, and he threatens countries with tariffs. And every now and then he has to deliver on those tariffs to get them to come to the negotiation table to agree to a free trade deal. The deal we have with Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. is a great free trade deal. I think he did a good job there. For South Korea, even with Japan, I think he's done a great job. And I think Trump is trying to bring these people to lower tariffs, to lower non-tariff barriers. That's my view. There are a lot of people who don't think he's that way. He's a protectionist. He's an isolationist. That is not the Donald Trump I know. The Donald Trump I know was a head of an international organization. And anyone who's head of an international company is, by definition, a free trader. And, in the G7 meeting, before he went to meet with Kim Jong-un, in that meeting, just before he left, he apologized to the other 6 members, saying, please forgive me, I have to leave to go meet with Kim Jong-un, and I know you want me to, but I have one thing to say before I leave. The U.S. is prepared right now to get rid of all tariffs and all non-tariff barriers if you are.
Yeah.
And so I view Donald Trump as a free trader who uses trade as a negotiation because, frankly, countries like Japan and countries like these other countries, and I won't put their names, all they care about is access to the U.S. market. And if he threatens that access to the U.S. market unless you negotiate, I think he's going to be successful. I am not a good negotiator. Right. I'm not. And so whenever he says that, he says it firmly, it scares the hell out of me. I roll up in a ball, I start crying and whimpering, wet my pants. But he is a good negotiator, and I think he will get very good free trade deals if he gets to be president. So, trade, Trump's way better than Biden. Taxes, Trump's way better than Biden. Spending, Trump's way better than Biden. Regulations, Trump's way better than Biden. Monetary policy, I would say that Biden is really bad. I haven't seen what Trump would do really on monetary policy, but Biden's bad. So in 4 out of 5, Trump is great. And in all 5, Biden is terrible. And in 1, Trump is neutral in my mind. So that's where I am on how I evaluate these people. And, and there are lots of people, Ariel, and I'm going to tell you my views on this. There are people who have all sorts of feelings about things. They like paintings. They don't like other paintings. They like garlic on there. Some people like butter. Those are all taste matters.
Right.
What I'm talking about here in economics is not about taste. This is about facts. And, there's 3 worst words in English, French, and German. In German, it's called nach meiner Meinung. In French, it's à mon avis. But in English, it's called, in my opinion. No one gives a goddamn about your opinion. This is about facts, not how you feel. And when you look at Donald Trump and look at how he behaves and what he did when he was president, factually, he did a great job as president. Now, you may not like him, but that's tough bananas. We're not electing someone you like. We're electing someone to be president. And that is what's critical. And the same thing I would say with Netanyahu in Israel, the same way with leaders of the world. You want a good president, you want a good prime minister, you want a good leader of the world, not someone you like or want to have a beer with or whatever. You follow me?
And also, I would just add that I would rather have a beer with Trump than Biden because he would probably fall asleep in the middle of the beer. So, Dr. Laffer, I wanted to ask you something historical before we get into the actuals of the Laffer Curve. Could you tell us the story about the napkin, where you drew on the napkin the famous story about the Laffer Curve?
There are lots of stories. I'm a professor. Have been all my life in economics at the University of Chicago, at Stanford, at Pepperdine, USC. And all of my classes were pretty much math, and a lot of it had to do with taxes and tariffs and all these sorts of things, which are pretty mathematical. And what I used to do is try to explain to people that if you raise taxes on one item, you'll get less of it. You may get, what turns out to be the Laffer Curve. And I illustrated, because all the math, they could follow the math, but I wanted to make it come alive. And I did this pedagogic device. There's 110% tax rates. How much would you work if every time you went to the office, instead of getting a check, you got a bill, you'd stop working, you get no revenues, and at zero tax, you get no. And I did that Laffer Curve there, and this was in my classes. I have a lot of examples like that, the Robin Hood theorems. I mean, I used to just try to imagine how to make the stuff come across intuitive to students, and I used that in a conversation on quick inflation now, which was the 5% tax surcharge by President Jerry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the curve, and they liked it. And it's like a joke. If you tell a joke and everyone laughs, you're going to tell it time and time again.
Right.
And so I did this probably at 30 or 40 dinners in 1974. So which one was the specific one or when it was, I'm not really sure, but the napkin, they say, is in the Smithsonian. But, I don't think it was. I think it's an ex post facto napkin. But nonetheless, there it is. But I was supposedly with my classmate, Dick Cheney, who was my classmate at Yale, and Don Rumsfeld, who had the misfortune of being a Princeton grad. And we were talking about Jerry Ford's 5% tax surcharge. I said, look, guys, with a 5% tax surcharge, you might be able to get 4% more revenue, but you won't get 5%. You might get 3%. You might even lose revenue. And then I did the curve, and I suppose the lights went on and all that. But that's the story. And supposedly I did it on a napkin, and how's that for a good story? But I did it every dinner I went to for the rest of that year.
It's all over the internet. When I was looking to talk to you, I was looking about interesting anecdotes, and the napkin is on every story about you. So
I know, it's great. It's a great story, isn't it? I love it, love it, love it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you just something on a more philosophical level about the Laffer Curve. So basically, like you said, the Laffer Curve says that at some point the revenues go down if you put up the taxes too much, and vice versa. But the way you look at the economy, even if the government were at a certain point able to raise taxes according to the Laffer Curve, and the revenue would still go up, you still think that we should lower taxes, right? Just as a principle.
Well, sometimes you need revenues to run government. You need to have them, and there's a level there, but it's way below the maximum tax rate for revenues. It's way below the tax maximizing level. No, I did Jerry Brown's flat tax when he ran for president in 1992, and what I did there was I got rid of all federal taxes in the U.S. Right, all of them except for sin tax. We set those aside, very small amount, and had two flat rate taxes, one on business net sales and one on personal unadjusted gross income, from no deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions, no credits, no omissions, nothing. And we had a flat tax of 13% on each, and that was it. I replaced every other federal tax. So, I probably take that rate down to 10%, maybe even a little lower than that. And you'd have the most prosperous economy that ever came. The issue of taxes should not be revenues.
Exactly.
Specifically, it should be prosperity.
Yeah.
And you want the lowest tax rate to provide the right amount of revenues for the government to do what it's supposed to do, and then stop.
Right. And maybe just to put the point in, even if the government is going to bring in revenue on a certain tax, that tax itself is putting down growth, right? Because
it can be. It can be. It depends. I mean, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, if they're doing a tax rate, let's say, to provide for military, judiciary, and railroad and roads and highways and schools, it may be very good to have that tax, and it'll increase growth to have that tax. But if they tax too much, then they'll stop growth. But if you don't have enough schools, you don't have enough highways, you don't have enough military, then you need to have taxes. So it's a balance. There's a optimal size of government, and if you have too little government, you need more. If you have too much government, you need less. And taxes are the way to fund it in general. Now, during wartime, it really helps to fund your government with deficits, because that changes the timing of production. So there are lots of subtle things that come into this that I don't know if you want to go through with your viewers on, but it's not.
We'll keep it simple, just because not everybody's an economist here.
But no, it is simple. Even the complicated part. I mean, it is. You can change the timing of production with taxes. You can change the volume of production. You can change the composition of production. You can change the location of production. You can change all these things with taxes. And what you want to do is do the correct tax structure to get the optimal prosperity and safety in your country.
I wanted to ask you one thing that I read about that Milton Friedman said, and I wanted to see if you agreed that. What do you think about the idea that property taxes, at least on unimproved land, aren't as bad as income taxes? Milton Friedman said that. Do you think that would be better to tax unimproved land and on expense of income taxes?
The way you put it, I think it's just silly what you just said. Just
explains.
First place, property taxes, if it's on unimproved, what's the value of the property?
Yeah.
Well, if you tax it, guess what happens to that value?
Lower.
You got it. Yep. Right. I can take you through an example. Let me give you an example here.
Okay.
We have property taxes here in the U.S. And I don't know if you do in Israel or not, but we have them here.
Yes, of course.
I'm going to give you an example that shows you what type of things property taxes do. And actually, property is an asset that has a yield. All right? And that yield, the discounted present value of that yield, is the value of the property.
Right.
I'm going to imagine it's like a bond. You have a bond, let's say a bond has a coupon of 8%. All right, let's say it's a $600,000 bond, and it has an 8% coupon, so that means you get $48,000 per year. That's just like a home with residential services, just like a farm with producing products and products that you sell in the marketplace, just like a factory that produces goods at the capital contribution to it, or just like a in commercial rental properties, all those. It has a yield per year, $600,000. Its coupon is 8%. So I'm going to say it's got $48,000 worth of yield every year. If market interest rates are also 8%, then the discounted present value of that $48,000 per year is the $600,000 value of the bond. You with me? But now, property taxes are different than income tax or sales taxes. For example, if I have an income tax, I may hate the income tax, but once I pay my income tax, that money's mine.
Right, exactly.
It's mine. I can do with it what I want. If I have a sales tax, I buy a product, damn, that sales tax high. But I got it, I've paid it, now that product is mine. Okay? But that's not true of property tax. Property taxes, they tax it this year, and they tax it next year.
Yeah.
They tax it the year out. The same damn property year in, year out. And that has a different effect than a sales tax or an income tax. This is where Milton, I don't think, understood the issue.
Okay.
And neither did Henry George. But let me, if I can, do this with you. Let's imagine we have the market rates of interest are 8%. The coupon is 8%. The bond is 6%. You have $48,000 per year. And let's say we're going to put a 1% property tax on that. That's 1%. That's all. Well, that means if it's a 1% property tax, that every year, 1% of the $600,000, $6,000. All right, I pay that to a government. I pay $6,000. They receive $6,000. There you go. Oh, but something else has happened. What else has happened? Now, the yield on the property no longer is $48,000. It's now $42,000. Oh,
right.
They're going to tax you next year, and so it'll be $42,000 every year from now on, not just 1 year, but forever. So now the discounted present value of $42,000 is what? If you're quick at math, and I know you are, Ariel.
No, I'm not.
Now the bond is worth $525,000. For the privilege of paying a $6,000 property tax per year, you've lost $75,000 in wealth. If it's a 2% property tax, the value goes from from $525,000 to $450,000.
Yeah.
And down to $375,000. A 4% tax is $300,000 on that. You know, the problem with property taxes is they are a tax on wealth, and they are the worst taxes in the world ever. And all of this crap, if I may say, about Henry George taxes and all that stuff, wrong, wrong, wrong. And if you think those politicians are going to tax the unimproved value on that property, you have got your head in a cloud and you're smoking pot. Those guys want more and more revenues all the time, and there is no way of you escaping a property tax. You can't move your property somewhere else. You just have to suffer that capital loss, period, and you lost. So I am really against wealth taxes and property taxes in general. I'm really much. And if there are property taxes, for example, local governments, which may need them for schools or some of the stuff there, they must have very strict limits on them and limits on how fast they can grow and what they can, a whole set of things. And I was very involved in California Proposition 13. But property taxes are not great taxes. And if Milton Friedman said that, and I'd love to have you send that, because I can't believe that he would say that.
Well, I got that quote from Josh Rowe, he's an economist at Stanford, and I was talking to him about what to ask you, different questions, and he brought that up. So I'll ask him to send me the quote. And
I want to see it here, because you just heard what I said.
Yeah. So
did you understand what I said?
100%. And I think it's interesting, just even if, let's just say that Josh was wrong, it is interesting to get your perspective on property taxes. And I do think it is also interesting to note that what you explained about the flat tax and how that would be so much better than everything that we have now. I wanted to ask you also just a very basic question. If you had to just give, where are we on the Laffer curve right now in the U.S.? I mean, you don't know Israel, but where's the U.S. on the Laffer curve?
No, I don't know if I'd like to put it that way. There are some tax rates that are way too high in the U.S. There's some tax rates that are probably too low. I did Jerry Brown's flat tax. I got rid of all federal taxes, all of them.
Right.
And in their stead, I put 2 flat rate taxes, one on business net sales, value added, and one on personal unadjusted gross income. No deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions, no omissions, no credits, no write-offs, none. You pay tax on the first dollar to the last dollar, period, on both of those taxes. If you looked at the static revenue loss, now this is when I did it with Jerry, but it'd be about the same now. I did the static revenue there with without a Laffer curve effect. I came out that the number came out about 11.8% on each, would give you a static revenue. I rounded it up to 12% for Jerry, just to make sure we didn't have any revenue losses. I didn't want to share it. And he rounded it up to 13%, which is fine. We came in second in the Democratic primary. We would have beaten Bill Clinton had he not named Jesse Jackson as his running mate. All right, that's what I would call, the way I'd like to see the structure of taxes. Now, if you had that structure, a flat tax on business net sales and that personal unadjusted gross income, that were your 2 tax bases with no deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions, nada. Okay? I would guess your tax revenue rate, tax neutral, the proper rate would be about 8% on each. Maybe about 15% of GDP.
Wow.
Would be in taxes, but you would have a GDP twice the size. Now you have a lot more revenues than we have. You would have no one doing tax sheltering. Who would do tax sheltering at that rate? No.
Right. Everybody want to come to America.
You wouldn't have any lawyers. You wouldn't have any accountants. You wouldn't have any deferred income specialists. You wouldn't have favor grabbers. IRS agents would all be fired and they go to work for productive reasons. And we'd have nirvana. And rich people, people with high incomes, they know they have to pay taxes, Ariel. They understand it. They just don't want to be cheated. They earned that money. It's theirs.
Right.
Pay taxes on it. But if you try to cheat them, they'll try to cheat you back. And so once you get it low enough at a flat rate, they'll voluntarily pay it. Now, there will, of course, be some tax cheats in there from time to time. There's always some creepy cheat, liar, scumbag, whatever it is, scofflaw. But basically, you don't have those cheats at 15% or 13% or whatever it is, flat tax. And at 8%, why wouldn't they just pay their taxes? And you pay it on increases in unrealized capital gains And if capital gains goes down, unrealized capital gains go down, you get it deducted.
Yeah.
That's the way you do it. And that's the way you run the system, and everyone's happy. You know, this idea that we're at war with rich people is the worst, stupidest, horrible. Everyone wants to be rich, and no one wants to be poor.
Right.
The dream in America has always been to make the poor richer, not the rich poorer. That's the dream. Hello. And
Not
so
in
when
today's, a lot of the people on the, were making the, I'm just thinking about, for example, Senator Elizabeth Warren. So she is, it seems to, Bernie Sanders, it goes without the point, but even a lot of the Democrat Party, who's even the center of the Democrat Party, is now openly war on, it's a war on fair share and all those kind of slogans and all that. So it is a sort of war on rich people a lot of the time.
Well, they are, and it's wrong. I mean, John F. Kennedy, I quote him here, and let me, if I can.
Yeah.
A society here is, we have a social compact here in the United States, and you and Israel have it too, is that I'm willing to live by your laws if you're willing to live by my laws, and we will decide which laws are in effect through a democratic process. And that's the pact. And if you win the election and you change the laws, I'll begrudgingly, but I will live by those laws and honor my commitment to you and everyone else in the pact. That's the way it's done. And what we need to do is understand that we're all in the same tub together.
Yeah.
And that we're all trying to survive and do our best we possibly can within that tub. And that's the way I think it should be done. So that when I make decisions, Ariel, I should make decisions with you in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's really offensive that I should try to persecute you for no reason. That's just not right. I shouldn't be able to rob you. I shouldn't be able to shoot you. I shouldn't be able to do any of these things that happen. Those are all wrong. Kennedy said it very perfectly. No American's ever made better off by pulling a fellow American down.
Right.
And we're all made better off if any one of us is made better off. And the next line he used that I love is, a rising tide, it raises all boats.
Right.
And, you know, here we are on the top. Let's make all of us better off. And when you look at the rich, you know, the rich understand fully well they're going to have to pay more in taxes than the poor. But if you make 8 times as much as I do, you should pay 8 times as much in taxes. That's fair. But you shouldn't pay 100 times more than I should in taxes.
Right.
And, you know, you need voluntary taxation, quote unquote voluntary. It's got to be a law, and it's got to be a law that you pay, okay? But people have to believe it's a good law.
Yes.
It's not a law persecuting them. And once you make it, and the rich know that 12% flat taxes is a good law, or 10%, or whatever it is, and they're willing to pay it. Now, there will be some cheats as well, but those guys you get. Yeah. But it's a voluntary system where we all know we have to pay our fair share, which is a flat rate.
Dr. Laffer, I have 2 last questions that I want to ask you.
Sorry to go on in that, but...
What?
I'm sorry to blather on so long.
No, it's fine. I wanted to ask you one, you didn't blather on. I wanted to ask you about the entitlement programs in America. So it seems to me that everybody is saying that we're going to hit a cliff at some point in the not so distant future, but because it's very hard politically, no one really talks about doing anything substantial to try to stop hitting that cliff. How would you
now explain to me what the cliff is?
I think that the actuaries of Social Security say that it'll be solvent at some point in the next few years, Medicare. So my question, just in terms of how would you tackle these issues if you were the next president, let's say?
Well, if I were to focus on these issues, and, you know, if something can't continue, don't believe it. It won't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there. Social Security, I make privatized accounts. I mean, that's it. You contribute into them, it's your account. And I would have a minimal amount of you having to show, so you won't become a burden on the state later on in life. So you have enough savings. And that's just the minimum standard there. I would do that. I mean, I don't know what else you'd like to talk about on that, but that's
I think it is interesting that, like, everybody knows that that's what we're going to have to do sometimes, but everybody's like a little bit worried about talking about it.
Well, I don't mind talking about it at all. We did it under Reagan. I mean, here I am, 83, working full time every day, and it used to be that 83-year-olds didn't work. but now we do. And the world has to change to reflect that. Life expectancy has changed dramatically. Now, what we did under Reagan with the Greenspan Commission is we extended the age of retirement from 65 to 67, I think it was. We did all sorts of stuff, and we're able to make the Social Security fully funded correctly. And that's what we should be doing now. If you want to do it through Social Security, you should do it where it reflects on life expectancy and make it so it's properly done. I'd like to see it privatized accounts, but
yeah. Well, I met, I don't know if you know him, Jose Pinera. He was in the...
Well, that's the one I know, Jose Pinera, very well. And he did it in Chile. Yeah. With exactly, and his brother was president. And, there was a great situation there. And I was down there in Chile in 1978. I was down there in 73 with Fidel Castro's visit when Pinochet took over. And, it was a pretty scary time, but that's the miracle of the Chicago boys. Yeah. And they were all our guys. I mean, and in Menem's Argentina, I was down there with that all during those days with Rocky Fernandez and Pedro Poe and Domingo Caballo and Carlos Rodriguez and all of the team, Ruben and Monacid, all the Chicago boys.
Dr. Laffer, maybe half a question. How was, you worked with Ronald Reagan, and it always interests me, what kind of a person was he? How was it working with Ronald Reagan?
He was really nice. I had lunch with him. No, I never took a job with any president after Nixon. But I made a vow I never would pollute myself by being an employee. Because once you're an employee, you can't tell the truth. You got to support. Boy, that's your job. I mean, that's your job. So I decided never to do that. I mean, they can't fire me. They can't pay more. They can't pay less. But I never went after them or so. I didn't misuse my position. And as you know, I'm pretty successful with Reagan's policies, and everyone in the White House opposed me except for one guy, Reagan. But other than that, I lost. But that was the only guy I was after. Reagan, I would have lunch with him from 1976 through 1979 at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. Just the two of us were the waiter there once a month, and he'd come in with a very civil, very nice, delightful, gentlemanly man, witty, funny, and he had there was an aura about him. You were with a movie star, Yeah. Wow. And I just liked him very, very much, and I saw a lot of him. And my first publication as an academic was in Reagan's first economic report of the governor. I had a little section in that. If you go and look at it, my first publication as a graduate student at Stanford was a little thing on California's growth prospects and Reagan's first economic report of the governor. He was a fine, gentlemanly man. I spent a lot of time with him. But he and Mrs. Reagan would come to the house for dinner, and I had a lot of times with him, and there were friends I have over and have Reagan. And so just a very, very nice person. And as president, pretty solid. I mean, he did some things that I didn't think he should have, but they were small things. He did some things overall. He did some things that were really good. And they were really big things. Yeah. And I just, it was fun being with him all the time. Wow. All the time. Never harsh, never nasty. When he got angry at you, he'd go like this. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He didn't flip you off. He was very gentlemanly, very soft-spoken, and very inclusive.
Very interesting. Doctor, like a piece of history talking to you. So it's very fun and very enlightening. I just want to say that for me, it's a great honor to have the opportunity to speak to you. And first of all, like you hear the Laffer Curve, but Dr. Laffer is here with me. It's almost like a dream. So I wanted to say that I appreciate talking to you. And
we're here all my friends in Israel. I hope I can get a good trip back there sometime soon.
When the war finishes, we'd love to have you. And you're invited to us.
Invite me, I'll come.
You're invited. And wait, let me just say to the audience, and then I'll talk to you about inviting you. I wanted to say thank you to everybody for watching us. I think anyone who's interested in economics, anyone who's interested in the economy, about what's happening in America, and even about what's happening in Israel, what we should be doing here, just in a general sense, I think this is an important, just as an intro to what we should do. So thank you so much for watching and listening.